everyone, it's Mary Brownlee, licensed professional counselor and trauma therapist. Today we're going to go over your stress response. We all have one. It's the system that activates when we're in danger or facing a threat, and it's important for keeping us safe. The problem is if you are a trauma survivor who's gone through either lots of abusive experiences in childhood, or maybe you're even an adult going through a chronic environmental stressor right now, this video will be helpful for you to understand why your nervous system reacts the way it does. And also, we're going to talk a little bit about how to calm the stress response down as well, because you really don't want it at a high level all the time. There are physical outcomes that can be dangerous to our health, both mental health and physical health long term, if our stress response is constantly in the on position. So yeah, I hope this video will be helpful. And without further ado, let's get into it. I almost forgot to mention, I got some new video of my adorable potbelly pig, and she's enjoying some of the jack-o'-lanterns that we carved for Halloween. So if you want to hear and see Tilly munching on some pumpkins, feel free to stick around to the end. All right, we all have a stress response. And so basically, if our bodies are facing some sort of threat, say you're walking in the forest and a bear approaches, or alternatively, you're at home, you're a young child, and you have a parent that's really terrifying and scary, and they scream and yell, and maybe they're physically abusive. Either of these situations is going to trigger the stress response in the body. And essentially, there are 4 stress responses. They are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And essentially, when your body detects threat, it releases stress hormones. And these essentially activate the body to prepare to run away, for example, or to fight back, or even to play dead or freeze, for example. And we'll talk about the 4th response here in a minute as well, and that one is called fawn. One thing I do want to point out is that it's important for people to recognize that these stress responses are automatic. So it's not like the brain is going, which trauma response or stress response should I have in this situation? No, like if we're in danger, we are programmed to keep ourselves safe by just having these. I mean, they're automatic. In less than a split second, the brain essentially picks whichever trauma response or stress response that it needs to try to keep you safe. You know, as a child, for example, a parent is far stronger than us and can overpower us and hurt us very easily. So you'll see a lot of trauma responses related to like freeze or running away, for example. Less likely fighting because, yeah, the parent is so scary and big. Your nervous system knows you can't survive that. So, yeah, there's no choice in the matter. This is just a split second. Your brain is literally detecting threat and pushing out hormones very rapidly to create a stress response. And essentially, boom, it takes over and your body picks one of the 4 to try to stay safe. So it's not like you're consciously thinking about which trauma response or stress response that you're going to do here. So I wanted to point that out because specific to sexual abuse survivors who often have the freeze response, for example, where they just like go frozen and play dead, for example, sometimes they blame themselves because they're like, well, I didn't fight back. And so it's important for trauma survivors to recognize if you did have a freeze response against tremendous abuse and a terrifying situation, you're not at fault. You didn't choose that response. The body took over and immediately did what it needed to do to keep you safe, to prevent you from dying, basically. So I don't want anybody to blame themselves if they have a specific stress response that maybe they later on, when the danger had passed, that they were blaming themselves in some way, shape, or form. Because no, these responses are automatic. They're very rapid. And so none of this is our fault, for example, for having a specific fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. And then I also want to point out that adrenaline and cortisol are the main hormones preparing the body to keep safe. So adrenaline is going to fill your body. You can feel it as it enters the body. It's like your heart rate is going to start to increase. Maybe you get some sweaty palms, for example. Your muscles are tensing up. The body is pushing more oxygen into the muscles to prepare you to run or fight back, for example. So adrenaline is very much that heart pumping energy that flows through us when we're in danger. And then cortisol is a stress hormone that helps keep the stress response elevated as long as we need to keep it going, basically. But as I mentioned, there's downsides to that, because if the stress response can't come back down to baseline, we can have some pretty negative physical things that happen to our bodies, and of course mental health outcomes. And it's not good for us to be in a constant state of stress. So we'll talk about that too in a little bit. All right, you can think of our stress response as comprised of two systems. And to make it a little bit easier to understand, you could think of like your car's gas pedal and braking system. So the gas pedal, of course, accelerates the car, and then the brake system, of course, stops your car. So very much the human body is comprised of a very similar system. Now, the sympathetic nervous system is our gas pedal. So that's the one that's pushing out those stress hormones to help us stay safe and start that stress response up. That fight, flight, freeze response gets going with adrenaline and a cortisol, for example. And then the braking system is the parasympathetic nervous system. And so that is the part of our nervous system that helps us to calm back down and for our nervous system kind of go back to a baseline where we're at rest. We call it the rest and digest part of our system as well. That it makes sense if you think about it, because if you're highly stressed, and probably a lot of you are, if you have chronic stress and trauma, you'll notice that you have a lot of GI, like gastrointestinal symptoms. Yeah, that's because your rest and digest system is not online. And so it's kind of hard to digest food and have normal bowel movements and all of that if we're in a constant state of stress. So yeah, sympathetic nervous system is gas pedal. Parasympathetic nervous system is the braking system. So yeah, hopefully that helps it to make a little more sense as well. The next slide here is going to really show you what the life cycle of the stress response looks like from beginning to end, basically. And at the top is kind of what I call like the bell curve. At the top of the curve here is really when it's at its peak. And then down here at the bottom where it goes back down, that's when it's kind of finalized its cycle and it goes back down to baseline. This will be important. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so number one, the threat is detected. In this case, say there's a terrifying lion that just happens to be nearby, and you bet your nervous system is going to react strongly to a terrifying lion. And essentially, the sympathetic nervous system has picked up on the threat through your eyeballs and releases adrenaline and cortisol very rapidly, which is going to prepare your muscles to essentially, in this case, run. So your nervous system is activated. Blood is now coursing through your body at a higher level to prepare your body to run and fight back if needed. More oxygen is being delivered to the muscles, for example. Your heart rate is very high to prepare the body, again, to be mobilized to fight the threat off. And so a lot of very complex things are going on very rapidly to try to keep you safe. So in this case, the person decides to run. That's at the top of the bell curve. He's running for his life, and say he gets away safely. And so that is number 4 here on the other side of the bell curve, where maybe he gets to safety, maybe he's inside of a house, gets to shut the door, and he's completely safe. And it might take him a little bit to calm down, because this is probably a terrifying threat, for example. But say in about 3 to 4 hours, he's finally realized he's safe. The lion walks off somewhere else. And the idea is the parasympathetic nervous system comes back online here to help him get back down to baseline and to stop that stress response. Now, the problem is, as I've mentioned, with trauma survivors, a lot of us, our parasympathetic nervous system doesn't really get a chance to come online and calm our nervous systems because there's chronic trauma and abuse going on. And so that is a problem for a lot of trauma survivors because it's just that layering effect of too many abusive situations chronically happening where the body's in a chronic state of fight or flight instead of being in a state of rest and digest. So that again will break the body down. It causes a lot of damage to say our hearts and our lungs and the immune system, and also mental health disorders like anxiety and depression and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well in the next few slides. Let's talk a little bit about the first stress response. This is the fight response. The fight response, of course, as it makes perfect sense, the body is responding with aggression. So that can take the form of things like yelling, having an explosive temper, violence, being very combative and argumentative with people, very angry a lot of the time. And oftentimes, if people have a primary stress response of anger and aggression and fight, the fight response, oftentimes when they're calmer is when they feel remorse. They recognize that, whoops, I probably could have responded better to that. So yeah, fight is definitely one that can get us into a bit more trouble, so to speak, as we get older, because fighting really isn't the best response. But nonetheless, like I said, there are cases where fight is absolutely needed. Say if somebody assaults you in an alley or something, yeah, you bet you're going to need to kind of fight your way out of that. But maybe not so useful when you're in the grocery store and, I don't know, somebody cuts you off in line and steps in front of you. No, you're not going to want to assault them, right? So yeah, this is where it's helpful working with a trauma therapist, because if we do have some of these primary stress responses that are causing problems in our relationships and lives, for example, it's helpful to have a trauma therapist working with us to overcome some of these kind of automatic stress responses that are causing some problems now that we're older. So yeah. Second one is the flight response. And this, of course, is running or fleeing to try to get away from a threat. And this can be manifested in several ways, actually, in our everyday life. What it can look like is shallow breathing, for example, where you don't like quiet or downtime, for example. It makes you kind of feel edgy and like uneasy, for example. Trauma survivors definitely mention this, like, ooh, if things are too quiet or too sedate and calm, oftentimes they're uneasy because it's like, when's the next shoe going to drop? Something terrible is going to happen. I just know it, right? So the system is so used to threat that it can't settle down too when things are actually calm and quiet. They don't like being trapped at all. So any feelings of being trapped is going to trigger this very highly, agitated, uneasy feeling. Anxiety and panic symptoms are a manifestation of the flight response. Restlessness and chronic tension. A lot of us trauma survivors, holy cow, do we hold tension in the body, right? Like myself, oh my goodness, the chronic tension and knots like in my shoulders and neck and back, that's been there forever. Every massage therapist I've ever been to is like horrified by how much tension I hold in my body. So yeah, that's kind of a manifestation, sadly, of like our nervous system really being in that flight response far too long and not being able to relax and come out of it. The third one is the freeze response, and that really is, the play dead response, essentially. So, of course, when we are faced with an overpowering threat, say even like you've seen hikers that have been assaulted by bears, and, they just go limp and play dead, for example. So yeah, if you're faced with an overwhelming threat, sometimes your only option is to play dead to try to survive the horrifying threat. Like maybe the predator will get bored with you and just walk off, for example. That's the theory, so to speak. And as I mentioned, the freeze response, of course, very commonly seen in sexual abuse survivors, and why I don't want any sexual abuse survivor to ever blame themselves for not fighting back, for example, because again, instantaneous, this is happening outside of your awareness, and the body's just picking this, trying to keep you safe and survive. And some of the ways that the freeze response can be shown in other ways in our lives is through like disassociation, numbing, a decreased heart rate, symptoms of shock. So like cold, clammy hands, for example, feeling stiffness in your limbs and heaviness in the limbs. So that's all, again, signs of the freeze response happening in the body. The fourth trauma response is fawn. So this came a little bit later after the fight, flight, freeze response. Those were already known in the literature. Fawn joined later. And essentially the fawn response is people pleasing. This is probably one of my primary trauma responses, and how I learned to survive in my family of origin that was abusive is through fawning. And so what that looks like is essentially a child, right? Again, a child needs mom or dad to stay safe and to survive. And it's so threatening to have our parents not love us that children learn very early on, well, if I just make mom or dad happy in whatever way that looks like, maybe they'll love me. I'll be able to be safe. They're not going to abandon me, and I can survive. So fawn really developed from that, from chronic childhood abuse and neglect. And even in domestic violence relationships, oftentimes you'll see whoever the victim is, man or woman, whoever the victim is, fawning in response to the abuser to try to, again, appease the abuser, try to keep them happy, prevent further abuse. And so really what this response looks like is like going along with whatever everyone else says. So you never really voice your own needs and thoughts and feelings. You're just kind of going along with whatever everybody else says. You don't want, yourself to stick out at all. Oh, no. Letting other people make decisions, putting other people's needs first, putting your needs last, obviously, and conflict avoidance. Oh my goodness, do I have like a part of me that is conflict avoidant to this day, because my father was so scary and had so much rage in him when I was a young child that I was terrified to set him off, because when he was set off, it was really scary. He could be out of control with his rage. So total conflict avoidance, people pleasing comes from witnessing overwhelming violence and terror and fear as a child, or just be happy, please don't hurt me. Poor boundaries, not being able to say no. So a lot of us with childhood trauma struggle with poor boundaries, and we don't recognize that we are allowed, in fact, it's a human right to have needs and thoughts and feelings that are different from other people. So essentially, to stay safe, we've picked whatever you want. Oh no, I don't have any needs. It's okay. What do you need? I'll keep you happy, right? And so this horrible pattern of putting ourselves last and not recognizing that, hey, we have human rights related to being able to voice our own thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and needs. And they're allowed to be different from other people. Like, that's not a crime. In fact, it's normal. But if you grew up in an abusive family, oh, no, you were not allowed to have different thoughts, needs, and feelings than the rest of the group. Oh no, that was not allowed. And also being hyper aware of other people's moods comes out of the fawn response. So a lot of trauma survivors mention that, myself included, that you can walk into a room and read the room accurately. Like, we're so able to pick up on other people's moods and feelings very, very quickly and easily, but we had to do so to stay safe as a child. You had to read the room of mom or dad to make sure, ooh, is this a bad night? Maybe I should just go in my room and read a book and be quiet and invisible, because it looks like mom or dad's going to go off tonight. So yeah, we've gotten very good at reading the room and reading people's moods to stay safe. So what can happen when our nervous system is stuck in the chronically on position? So I talked a little bit about this already, but this slide really goes into it with a little bit more detail. Chronic stress and trauma can lead our sympathetic nervous system to be constantly stuck in the on position. This is basically like your car engine idling on high all the time. And as you can imagine, our car engine is not supposed to be idling on high. That will break the engine down over time. Well, the same thing with our body. Our body is not meant to be chronically stressed and elevated all the time either. And so this can break down the body over time. It can cause things like illnesses, mental health problems like depression and anxiety and symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, lowered immune system. We get sick more often, increased blood pressure. So this is directly related to people like having strokes and heart attacks earlier than they might otherwise have had them, and changes in appetite and weight gain. So again, cortisol, a primary stress hormone, very responsible for weight gain and like not being able to lose weight as well. So that's also related to chronic stress and trauma. And that it's important to learn how to activate our parasympathetic nervous system. That's that braking system, the rest and digest system, in order to restore our bodies back to balance and to come out of that fight or flight. And so what are some of the ways that we can do that? Some of the ways that we can calm our parasympathetic nervous system are really things that help us to relax. And I would include social engagement in this list, whether it's through trusted friends, maybe that you have outside of the abusive family system, or a therapist is really great too. Our social engagement system is very important for our mental health and our emotional health. And we were meant and are hardwired for healthy social engagement with others. So if that's something you struggle with, no worries. That is common with trauma survivors. You can really do yourself some wonders by getting a good trauma therapist. Anybody who has extra training in trauma, that will really help the system. But also engaging in friendships, whether it's through people you meet at work or maybe some groups that you have found. Maybe you have shared hobbies or interests and you're in some of those groups. But yeah, social engagement is a part of this as well. Additional ways of calming our nervous system is through things that include like gentle movement and deep breathing. So things like yoga, Tai Chi, even martial arts. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk is probably one of the biggest trauma experts in the world, and he talks about the importance of healing trauma by including body work. And his famous book, The Body Keeps the Score, I highly recommend it for anybody interested in probably one of the most amazing foundational books ever written about trauma. It's very important that we include the body when healing trauma, not just our minds through therapy or talk therapy, but including body work in this. Things like yoga and Tai Chi and even like martial arts, for example. You're helping the body learn to come out of fight or flight, and you're learning to feel safe inside your body again. And a lot of times there's breath work also that's activating and engaging the parasympathetic nervous system. These are really helpful for healing the body as well as the mind. I also love body work like massage, for example. That also is wonderful for helping the body to come out of fight or flight as well. So those are some additional things to do with your bodies to help you heal from trauma. And then other things like mindfulness is huge. Again, that breath work and staying in the present moment is really helpful for engaging that parasympathetic nervous system and helping us come out of fight or flight. Guided visualization exercises, guided meditations, very helpful also. When my symptoms were really bad, I started listening to guided meditations at night before I went to sleep. So hypnotherapy, for example, where they're leading you on like special pathways and affirmations, and there's gentle music or nature sounds, and you have a narrator kind of narrating something soothing and relaxing. That's helpful for engaging the parasympathetic nervous system. I mentioned exercise, positive social relationships, mentioned that. Spending time with your pets counts, by the way. Pets do wonders for our mental and emotional health. And favorite activities or hobbies. Like if you weren't allowed to really find something you were interested in as a child, now's the time to kind of explore various avenues, whether it's maybe you love painting or you love writing, or maybe you love crochet or basketball or something like that. There probably are meetups or groups in your area where like-minded people meet up to enjoy these activities together. Feel free to look into stuff like that. So I hope some of these ideas were helpful. Feel free to add any of them into your lives. I hope you find them helpful. And yeah, this is so important for us when we're healing from trauma to find a variety of ways, aside just from therapy, which is great, but also body methods and breath work and social relationships, for example. Like healing involves adding a bunch of different puzzle pieces together to complete the picture of healing. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, don't forget to leave a like or subscribe. Feel free to comment, ask me any questions. I love all the questions and comments I've been getting. I love your engagement. It just makes my day. I'm so glad that a lot of my videos have been helpful, and I so enjoy interacting with every one of you. Again, I was a trauma survivor myself, so I've been in your shoes. I know exactly what it feels like. And what it's like to try and heal. So feel free to drop comments, questions. I'll do my best to answer them. If you have any ideas for videos you'd like to see, feel free to drop that information as well. And I appreciate every single one of you. And I hope you all take care. And I will see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.
Is it good? Is it good? Yum yum? No? Was it good?